I inherited a shed falling apart, but what I found inside changed my life. Martha Sullivan stared at the embossed letterhead from the notary's office with a mix of confusion and resignation. After 43 years without news from Aunt Eleanor, she had inherited a shed on the outskirts of Millfield, a small town in rural Pennsylvania where she had never set foot. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, had been clear on the phone. "You need to come settle the situation as soon as possible. The property is in poor condition and incurring maintenance costs." "Grandma, you didn't even really know this aunt existed," said Caitlin, her 17-year-old granddaughter, who was sitting in the kitchen of their Pittsburgh home, scrolling through social media on her phone. "Why not just sell it and be done with it?" Martha sighed as she put the documents in the leather bag she had used for over 10 years. Since Richard had passed away the previous year, every decision seemed to carry more weight. Her retirement as an elementary school teacher had coincided with her widowhood, leaving her in a state of limbo she still didn't know how to navigate. "I don't know, Kate. Something tells me I need to see this place first." "But Grandma, look what it says here on the search engine." Caitlin turned her phone screen toward her. "Millfield has like 15,000 people. It must be in the middle of nowhere." Martha came closer and saw the aerial photo of the small town surrounded by corn and soybean fields. It really didn't seem like the kind of place where someone in the family would have lived, but Eleanor had always been a mystery. She vaguely remembered her mother's comments about a sister who had gone her own way and never given any news. "Let's go together," Martha said suddenly. "It could be an adventure." Caitlin looked up from her phone with a skeptical expression. "Seriously, Grandma? Going to the middle of nowhere to see an old shed? You spend all day complaining that you have nothing to do during vacation. And besides, when was the last time we went out together, just the two of us?" The girl considered for a moment. Since her grandfather had passed, she had noticed how lost her grandmother seemed, wandering around the house that was too big for one person. Maybe a trip, even to a boring place, could help. "All right, but if it's too boring, we come back the same day." 2 weeks later, they were on the road to Millfield in Martha's blue Ford Focus. The 2-hour trip was punctuated by rural landscapes and sparse conversations. Caitlin alternated between her phone and comments about how everything was so green and all the same. When they finally reached the town, the sun was beginning to set on the horizon. The streets were wide and tree-lined, with simple houses and some commercial buildings concentrated in the central area. Martha followed the GPS directions until they reached a more remote area, where the lots were larger and the buildings more spread out. The shed appeared before them like a shadow against the orange evening sky. It was a masonry building of about 200 square meters, originally painted white but now peeling and stained by time. The large windows had several broken panes, and the iron gate was half open, creaking softly in the wind. "Wow, Grandma," Caitlin murmured, getting out of the car and staring at the structure. "It looks like one of those places from a horror movie." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. Martha felt a tightness in her chest as she observed the state of the property. The exterior walls showed signs of water damage, and small plants grew between the cracks in the bricks. Even so, there was something about the structure that didn't seem completely deteriorated. The foundations appeared solid, and the shape of the shed suggested it had once been an important place. "Let's go in," she said, taking the keys the lawyer had given her. "Are you sure, Grandma? What if the roof falls on our heads?" "It won't fall. Look how sturdy the beams are." They approached the main gate. The lock was rusty, but the key turned with some effort. The metal's creak echoed through the space as Martha pushed the heavy iron door. The inside of the warehouse was immense and full of shadows. The late afternoon light came through the broken windows, creating golden beams that illuminated the dusty air. There was debris scattered across the floor, pieces of wood, dry leaves brought by the wind, and what looked like furniture covered with old tarps. Caitlin turned on her phone's flashlight and began examining the space. "Grandma, look at this," she said, pointing to a pile of objects near the entrance. Martha approached and saw they were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with time and tied together with string. Many were addressed to Martha Sullivan in an elegant handwriting she didn't recognize. "They're for you, Grandma," said Caitlin, picking up one of the letters and checking the address. With hands trembling slightly, Martha untied the string and opened the first letter. The date at the top was from 15 years ago. "My dear niece Martha, I know it may seem strange to hear from me after all this time, but not a day goes by that I don't think of you and your family. I tried to make contact several times over the years, but my letters never seem to reach their destination. I hope this one finds you well. I have so much to tell about our family, about your mother, about secrets that have been kept for too long. If you receive this letter, please come visit me. I am in Millfield at the family's old studio. With all my love, Aunt Eleanor." Martha felt her legs go weak and leaned against one of the warehouse columns. "What is it, Grandma? Are you okay?" "She tried to get in touch with me," whispered Martha. "All these years she tried." Caitlin picked up another letter from the pile, this one with a more recent date. "This is from 5 years ago," she said, beginning to read. "Martha, my dear, I know my previous letters didn't reach you. I found out someone was intercepting my correspondence, but I can't prove who. There are things about our family you need to know before it's too late." The two fell silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those revelations. Martha took a few more letters from the pile, all addressed to her, all never sent or intercepted in some way. "Grandma," Caitlin said softly, "there's more here." She was pointing to a solid wood table covered with a tarp. When Martha pulled off the fabric, it revealed dozens of photographs spread across the surface. Many were old, in black and white, but some were colored and more recent. Martha picked up one of the old photos and had to steady herself again. It was a young woman about 20 years old, with long blonde hair, wearing a simple but elegant dress. The resemblance to Caitlin was striking. "My God," she murmured. "Caitlin, look at this picture." The girl approached, and her eyes widened. "Grandma, is that me? But when was it taken?" Martha turned the photo over and read the note on the back. "Margaret Sullivan, 1952. "Margaret was my mother's name," said Martha, her voice choked. "Your great-grandmother. But Grandma, she looks just like me. How can she be so similar?" Before Martha could answer, they heard the sound of footsteps at the warehouse entrance. A rough male voice echoed through the space. "Excuse me? Is someone there?" They turned and saw an elderly man at the entrance, wearing a straw hat and simple rural work clothes. He seemed nervous and stood on the doorstep as if he didn't want to come in. "Good afternoon," said Martha, walking toward him. "I'm Martha Sullivan, the new owner." The man took off his hat and held it with both hands. "Ah, yes, Aunt Eleanor's niece. My name is Walter Simmons. I'm the neighbor next door. I came here because, well, I wanted to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" Walter quickly glanced around the warehouse, as if searching for something specific. "You certainly don't have any interest in keeping this place, do you? I mean, everything is very run down. It must be a lot of work and expense. I can buy it from you for a fair price, $10,000 cash." Martha found the offer strange. There was something about the man's haste and nervousness that didn't seem natural. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Simmons, but I just arrived. I need to examine the property more carefully before making any decision." The man's face tightened slightly. "But ma'am, the truth is, this place isn't safe. The roof could collapse at any moment, and there are problems with the documentation too. It would be better to get rid of this burden quickly." "What documentation problems?" asked Martha, intrigued. "Well, I mean, there are rumors I heard. Tax issues, those things. Better not to get involved." Caitlin, who had been silently observing the conversation, approached her grandmother. "Grandma, I found another interesting thing here." She was holding an object she had found under one of the tarps. It was an old sewing mannequin, still wearing an incomplete wedding dress. The fabric was delicate lace, and even with time it still maintained an impressive beauty. Walter saw the mannequin, and his expression changed visibly. He seemed to become even more agitated. "You really should accept my offer," he said with a more urgent tone. $15,000 then, it's a good deal." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Martha asked directly. Well, I have plans for the land, Agriculture. Yes, agriculture. There was something false in the response, and Martha decided to trust her instinct. Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons, but I'm not interested in selling now. The man put his hat back on his head and nodded curtly. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me, but don't take too long. Sometimes abandoned properties attract problems. After he left, Martha and Caitlin were alone again in the quiet warehouse. Grandma, that guy was weird, said Caitlin. Why did he want to buy this place so badly? Good question. And why did Aunt Eleanor say someone was intercepting her letters? They continued exploring the space. As the natural light faded, Caitlin used her phone's flashlight to illuminate the corners of the warehouse. They discovered there were several internal partitions creating small spaces. In one of them, they found an old sewing machine still in good condition, surrounded by rolls of fabric and sewing tools. This place was a workshop, said Martha, gently touching the sewing machine. Aunt Eleanor used to sew here. Look here, Grandma, Caitlin called from another corner. There are several mannequins with dresses. Martha joined her and saw a real collection of wedding dresses in different stages of production. Some were complete, others were just fabric sketches. Each mannequin had a small tag attached to the dress. She picked up one of the tags and read, "For Mary Jo, wedding in October 1998. Story, overcame fear of loving again after being left at the altar at 20. How strange, murmured Martha. Why did she write the client's stories? Caitlin checked other tags. Look at this one. For Dorothy Reynolds, wedding in March 2003. Story, found love at 45 after raising 3 children alone. And this one, for Rose Matthews, wedding in June 1995. Story, faced family to marry the man she loved, even though he was from a different social class. Martha felt a lump in her throat. Each dress represented a woman's story, a personal victory, a moment of hope and courage. Aunt Eleanor wasn't just a seamstress, she said with growing emotion. She was a confidant, someone these women trusted with their dreams. But Grandma, why did she keep all this? And why didn't anyone in the family know? Before Martha could answer, her phone rang. It was a local number she didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Sullivan? This is Mr. Patterson, the attorney. Are you at the property now? Yes, I am. I need to inform you of something important. I received a call from the town mayor. It seems there are some issues with the property documentation that need to be resolved urgently. What kind of issues? Urban compliance matters. The mayor said it might be necessary to demolish the building if it doesn't meet current regulations. He wants to schedule a meeting with you today. Martha looked around the warehouse, seeing the dresses, the photographs, the never-sent letters. Something very strange was happening. Mr. Patterson, my aunt lived here for decades. How can there be compliance issues only now? Well, these bureaucratic matters are complex. The important thing is to resolve them quickly to avoid bigger complications. After hanging up, Martha shared the conversation with Caitlin. Grandma, this doesn't make sense. First the neighbor wanting to buy in a hurry, now the mayor with documentation problems. It seems like everyone wants you to leave here. Exactly what I'm thinking. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. They decided to return to the hotel where they were staying and come back the next day with more time to examine everything. During dinner at a small local restaurant, Martha couldn't get the intercepted letters and the pressure to sell the warehouse out of her head. Grandma, do you think Aunt Eleanor was involved in something suspicious? I don't know, dear, but one thing I do know. She desperately tried to contact me, and someone prevented it. I need to find out why. The next morning, they returned to the warehouse with flashlights, basic tools, and determination to explore every corner of the place. Daylight revealed details that had gone unnoticed the night before. Martha noticed there was a door at the back of the warehouse they hadn't seen. It was a separate entrance, somewhat hidden by vegetation growing on the side of the building. Caitlin, look here, she called. There's another entrance. They made their way through the vegetation and reached the door. The master key also worked in this lock. When they opened it, They discovered a small room that appeared to have been an office. There was an old desk, a wooden filing cabinet with several drawers and several boxes stacked neatly. The windows in this room were intact, protected by wooden blinds that had kept the space in better condition. "It's as if she preserved this place for someone to find," said Martha, observing the meticulous organization of the space. They began examining the filing cabinet. The drawers were organized by years, and each contained folders with women's names and their respective sewing projects. But they weren't just client records. They were detailed stories, correspondence, and even photographs of the women at important moments in their lives. "Grandma, look at this," said Caitlin, pulling a folder from the drawer marked 1995. "There are wedding photos here, but also thank you letters, baby birth certificates, graduation photos." Martha picked up one of the thank you letters and read it aloud. "Mrs. Eleanor, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. It wasn't just the most beautiful dress in the world, but you gave me the courage to start over when I thought my life had ended. My daughter was born last month, and I want you to know she'll be named Eleanor in your honor." "Grandma," said Caitlin softly, "your aunt wasn't just a seamstress. She helped these women in other ways." Martha continued exploring the folders and found a pattern that intrigued her. Many of the stories were from women who had gone through difficult situations: complicated divorces, early widowhood, abandonment, domestic violence, teenage pregnancy, and all of them seemed to have found in Eleanor not just a seamstress, but a counselor and an ally. "She created a support network," murmured Martha. "She used the studio as a front, but she was actually helping women in vulnerable situations." "But Grandma, was this secret? Why didn't anyone know?" Before she could answer, they heard voices from outside the warehouse. Martha approached the window and saw two men talking near the main gate. One of them was Walter, the neighbor from the day before. The other was a younger man wearing a suit whom she didn't recognize. "We have to convince her to sell quickly," said the man in the suit. "If she starts poking around too much, she might discover things she shouldn't." "I tried, Mayor," replied Walter, "but she doesn't want to sell. And worse, she brought her granddaughter along. Two women snooping where they shouldn't. Then we'll have to use other methods. Documentation problems, irregularities, those things. The important thing is to get her out of here before—" "Before what?" interrupted Walter. "Before she discovers that we were the ones intercepting old Eleanor's letters all these years." Martha felt her blood run cold. Caitlin, who was beside her listening, tightly gripped her grandmother's arm. "What if she finds out about the group that used to meet here?" continued the mayor. "About the women Eleanor helped disappear from town when their husbands turned violent." "That was a long time ago, Mayor. And Eleanor died, taking her secrets with her." "Not all the secrets," said the man in the suit with a worried tone. "She must have left something recorded. An organized woman like her." The men walked away, continuing their conversation in lower voices. Martha and Caitlin stood frozen for a few minutes, processing what they had heard. "Grandma," whispered Caitlin, "they were intercepting Aunt Eleanor's letters on purpose, and she helped women escape from violent husbands." "And apparently that bothered certain people in town," said Martha, feeling a mix of anger and pride. "Aunt Eleanor was much braver than I imagined. They decided to explore the archive more discreetly, looking for evidence of what the men had mentioned. In one of the older drawers, Martha found a folder marked as Refuge Project with a date from 15 years ago. Inside the folder, there was a list of women's names, dates, and destinations. Some notes said things like, relocated to Philadelphia, new identity provided, or moved to New York City, host family found. "My God," murmured Martha. "She really helped women start new lives elsewhere." "But how did she do it, Grandma? A small-town seamstress." Martha kept reading and found correspondence with women's support organizations in various cities, contacts with lawyers specializing in domestic violence, and even details about how to forge documents when necessary. "She had a network of contacts," explained Martha. "She knew people in other cities who could help, and she used the studio as a discreet meeting point." "Grandma, look at this," said Caitlin, pointing to a note at the end of the folder. "If anything happens to me, all records should go to my niece Martha. She'll know what to do." Martha felt tears in her eyes. Eleanor had trusted her, even without knowing her well, even without being able to make contact all those years. She knew I would end up coming here, she said. She knew I would discover all this. But Grandma, if the mayor and other people in town knew what she was doing, why didn't they stop her before? Maybe because she was very respected, or very clever, or maybe because she had information they didn't want to be made public. Martha decided to look for more evidence and opened a box in the corner of the room. Inside, she found a leather-bound notebook with the word "Memories" engraved on the cover. She opened it to the first page and recognized Eleanor's elegant handwriting. "To my dear niece Martha, if you're reading this, it means you managed to find this place and discover my secrets. I hope you understand that everything I did was out of love for the women who needed a second chance." "She documented everything," said Martha, flipping through the pages. "Every case, every story, every person she helped." "And look here," said Caitlin, pointing to a specific page. "There's a story about our family." Martha read the passage her granddaughter indicated. "My sister Margaret came to me pregnant and desperate in 1965. She had gotten involved with a married man who abandoned her when he found out about the pregnancy. Our parents kicked her out of the house because of the disgrace. I helped her through the pregnancy and childbirth, and when the girl was born, we decided it would be better for everyone if I raised the child as if she were Margaret's with a husband who had left. The girl would be named Martha." The notebook slipped from Martha's hands and fell to the floor. Caitlin hurried to pick it up. "Grandma, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "Caitlin," said Martha with a trembling voice, "I'm Aunt Eleanor's daughter. My mother Margaret was actually my aunt." "What do you mean, Grandma?" "Margaret raised me as if she were my mother, but Eleanor was my biological mother. That's why there's a resemblance between you and that old photo. You don't look like your great-grandmother Margaret. You look like your great-great-grandmother, who was my real grandmother." Caitlin fell silent, trying to process the information. "So, Aunt Eleanor was actually your mother, and she never told you?" "According to the records here, she tried. For decades she tried to contact me, but someone always prevented it. Now we know it was the mayor and other people in town." "But why would they do that, Grandma?" Martha continued reading the notebook and found more clues. "The current mayor, Charles Montgomery, was at the time a young lawyer who helped several families cover up scandals of unmarried pregnant daughters. He charged dearly for these services and didn't like my interference. When I started helping women for free, it hurt his business. He made money exploiting families in vulnerable situations," said Martha, feeling anger growing in her chest. "And Aunt Eleanor disrupted that by helping women for free. And Mr. Walter, why is he involved?" Martha searched the notebook and found a reference. "Walter Simmons was always in love with me since our youth. When I refused his marriage proposal to dedicate myself to my work with the town's women, he became resentful. Over the years, that resentment turned into anger, and he began collaborating with those who wanted to harm me. So he intercepted her letters out of personal revenge," concluded Caitlin. "And now they want to drive me out of here before I discover everything and decide to continue her work." Martha closed the notebook and looked around the small office. There was still so much to discover, so many stories to learn. But more importantly, there was a legacy to honor. "Grandma," said Caitlin softly, "what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But I know I won't sell this place to them. Not after discovering all this. What if they really create legal problems? What if they demolish the warehouse? Then we'll fight. Aunt Eleanor and my mother fought her whole life to help other women. The least I can do is fight to preserve her memory." They carefully stored the most important documents in a bag and decided to return to the hotel to plan their next steps. But as they were leaving the warehouse, they saw a car parked in front of the gate. An elderly woman with white hair and an elegant posture was getting out of a small, compact car. She wore a simple but well-tailored dress and carried a vintage bag. "Excuse me," she said, approaching. "Are you Mrs. Eleanor's niece?" "Yes, I am," replied Martha. "My name is Martha." "My name is Dorothy Reynolds. I was a very close friend of your aunt." Martha remembered seeing this name on one of the wedding dress tags. "Are you the Dorothy who got married in 2003? The woman's face lit up. Exactly. Mrs. Eleanor made my wedding dress when I had already lost hope of getting married. I was 45 years old with 3 children to raise alone. "Please come in," said Martha, opening the gate. "I'd really like to talk with you." Dorothy looked around the warehouse nostalgically. "It's been 5 years since I've been here. When Mrs. Eleanor passed away, I had to distance myself because of certain pressures." "What kind of pressures?" "The mayor approached me and said it would be better if I didn't talk about the things that happened here. He said there could be problems for me and my children if I started telling stories." "Mrs. Dorothy," said Martha, "I just discovered that Eleanor was my biological mother, and that she tried to contact me for decades without success." "I know," Dorothy said softly. "She told me your story many times. She suffered greatly from not being able to speak with you. Do you know who intercepted the letters?" Dorothy hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Martha, there's much you don't know about what happened in this town. Mrs. Eleanor didn't just help women sew wedding dresses. She saved many lives." "I found her records, the Refuge Project." "Then you already know," said Dorothy, relieved. "Mrs. Eleanor saved me. My first husband was violent. He beat me and the boys. When I found the strength to leave home with the children, I had nowhere to go. Mrs. Eleanor hid me here for 3 months until she found me a house to rent in another city and a job as a seamstress." "And how many times did she do this?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds over the years. This warehouse was a safe refuge. Women would come here pretending it was for dress fittings, but actually to ask for help or to hide." Caitlin, who had been listening silently, asked a question. "Why didn't anyone report the violent husbands to the police?" Dorothy laughed bitterly. "Dear, back then, and still today in many cases, the police didn't believe women. Or when they did believe, they said it was a marital dispute where they couldn't intervene. Mrs. Eleanor created an alternative protection network, and the mayor knew about all this. He knew and didn't like it. Some of the women Mrs. Eleanor helped were wives of influential men in town. When they disappeared, it created social embarrassment for these men, and the mayor depended on their political support." Martha began to understand the complexity of the situation she had inherited. "Mrs. Dorothy, why did you come here today?" "Because I heard you had arrived in town, and because I have something that belonged to your mother." Dorothy opened her bag and took out a small carved wooden chest. "She asked me to keep this and give it to you if anything happened to her. She said that inside were the proofs of everything that had happened over the years." Martha took the chest with trembling hands. It was heavy and had a small but sturdy lock. "The key is here," said Dorothy, handing over a small golden key. "But Mrs. Sullivan, I must warn you, some people in this town won't like you opening this chest." "Why?" "Because inside are names, dates, photographs, and evidence of many things that certain people would prefer remained buried." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Martha looked at the chest, then at Caitlin, and finally at Dorothy. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you think I should open it?" "Mrs. Sullivan, your mother dedicated her entire life to protecting women who had no voice. Now it's up to you to decide whether you want to continue this work or prefer to leave everything buried in the past." "I'll open it," said Martha without hesitation. She inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The old mechanism responded with a soft click. When she lifted the lid, it revealed dozens of envelopes organized by dates, photographs, and some personal items. The first envelope was marked, "For Martha," read first. Inside there was a long letter written on letterhead paper. "My dear daughter, if you're reading this, you've managed to find your way here and discovered the truth about our family. I ask forgiveness for all the lost years, for all the birthdays I missed, for all the hugs I couldn't give. When you were born, I was a young single woman at a time when that was considered a terrible disgrace. My sister Margaret offered to raise you as if you were her own, and I accepted, thinking it would be best for you, but I never stopped loving you or thinking of you every day. Over the years, I tried several times to make contact, but there was always interference. I discovered that some people in the town were intercepting my letters because they didn't want me to have contact with the family. They feared I might reveal secrets about the work I was developing here. I built a life dedicated to helping women who were going through difficult situations. I started by sewing wedding dresses, but soon realized that many of my clients needed more than pretty clothes. They needed hope, support, and sometimes an escape to a new life. If you decide to continue my work, you will find in this chest all the necessary contacts. If you decide not to continue, at least preserve the memory of the women who passed through here. Each one of them has an important story that deserves to be remembered. I love you more than words can express. Your mother, Eleanor. Martha felt tears rolling down her face. Caitlin approached and held her hand. Grandma, you're not alone in this. I will help you. Child, you don't even really know what this is about, said Martha, wiping her eyes. Yes, I do. It's about helping women who need a second chance. And that's important, isn't it? Dorothy smiled, watching the conversation between grandmother and granddaughter. Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter has the same generous spirit as you and Mrs. Eleanor. Granddaughter, corrected Caitlin. I'm Grandma Martha's granddaughter. Sorry, said Dorothy. Your granddaughter. But I see that the strength of the women in this family passes from generation to generation. Martha continued exploring the contents of the chest. There were photographs of women with their new partners, thank you letters from people who had rebuilt their lives, and a list of contacts in various United States cities, lawyers, social workers, support organizations, families offering temporary shelter. This is a national network, murmured Martha. She wasn't working alone. Not at all, confirmed Dorothy. Mrs. Eleanor was a correspondent for several women's protection organizations. This warehouse was just one point in a much larger network. Mrs. Dorothy, said Caitlin, are there still women in town who need this kind of help? Unfortunately, yes, dear. Maybe even more now than before. But since Mrs. Eleanor passed away, there's nowhere left for them to go in Millfield. Martha picked up another envelope from the trunk. This one was marked as evidence, use only if necessary. Inside were photographs of men assaulting women, suspicious death certificates, medical reports of injuries inconsistent with official explanations, and cassette tape recordings. My God, she whispered, Aunt Eleanor documented the cases of violence. She was very systematic, explained Dorothy. She said that one day this evidence might be needed to bring about justice. But why did she never use this evidence? Because back then, the judicial system was even less receptive to domestic violence reports, and she feared that exposing this information would endanger the women who had managed to escape. Martha continued examining the material and found a specific folder with the name Charles Montgomery, Mayor. Inside were documents showing he had taken bribes to resolve unwanted pregnancy cases, forged official documents, and even facilitated assaults against women who caused problems for his clients. This man is a criminal, said Martha, holding the documents. And he's still the mayor, added Dorothy. Mrs. Eleanor always said that one day this information would be needed to stop him. Grandma, said Caitlin, if you have proof that the mayor committed crimes, shouldn't you report it? It's not that simple, dear. This is old evidence, and he must have powerful allies. Besides, exposing this information could endanger people who preferred to keep their stories private. Dorothy approached and spoke quietly. Mrs. Martha, I need to tell you something. Last night Walter came to see me. Said you were messing with things you shouldn't, and that I'd better convince you to sell the warehouse and leave. Did he threaten you? Not directly, but he said, accidents can happen to very curious people. Martha felt a chill down her spine. The situation was becoming more complicated than she had imagined. Mrs. Dorothy, do you think it's dangerous to stay here? I think it's both dangerous and necessary. Mrs. Eleanor faced these same threats for decades and never backed down. The question is, do you have the courage to do the same? Martha looked around the warehouse, seeing the dresses that represented fulfilled dreams, the documents that told stories of overcoming, and the legacy of a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting others. Then she looked at Caitlin, who was watching her expectantly. I do, she said firmly. But first I need to better understand how the whole system she created worked. I can help with that, offered Dorothy. I know several of the women who came through here. Some still live in the area, others moved away, but we keep in touch. And would they be willing to talk to me? I think so. Especially if they know you're Mrs. Eleanor's daughter and that you're considering resuming the work. Resuming the work? Asked Caitlin. Grandma, are you thinking of moving here? Martha hadn't consciously thought about it, but when her granddaughter asked the question, she realized the idea was already forming in her mind. I don't know yet, Kate, but I know I can't just ignore all this and go back home as if nothing happened. And if you decide to stay, I could come spend my vacations here helping, said Caitlin. I could learn to sew, help with organizing the documents. Honey, that would be a very big change in our life. Grandma, ever since Grandpa died, you've been lost at home. Here you have a purpose, and I can see how your eyes lit up when you discovered Aunt Eleanor's story. Dorothy smiled as she listened to the conversation. Mrs. Martha, may I suggest something? How about talking to some of the women Mrs. Eleanor helped before making a decision? That way you can better understand the real impact of her work. Good idea. Can you arrange these meetings? Yes, I can, but I must warn you, the mayor and his allies won't stand still. They'll increase the pressure for you to sell the warehouse. Then we'd better act fast. They agreed that Dorothy would arrange discreet meetings with some of the women who benefited from Eleanor's work. Meanwhile, Martha and Caitlin would continue exploring the documents and organizing the material found in the warehouse. When Dorothy left, Martha and Caitlin were alone again in the quiet space of the warehouse. The afternoon was getting late, and the golden sunlight came through the windows, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "Grandma," said Caitlin, sitting in one of the old chairs, "are you really thinking about leaving our life in Pittsburgh to come live here?" "What life do I have there, dear? After your grandfather passed, I stay home all day not knowing what to do. Sometimes I spend hours staring at the walls, feeling like my life ended along with his. But you have your friends, your school friends." "Yes, I do. But it's different. Here I feel like I can do something really important. I can honor my mother's memory and at the same time help other women." Caitlin stayed silent for a few minutes, absorbing her grandmother's words. "What about me?" she finally asked. "What do you mean?" "You've always been the most important person in my life, Grandma. Ever since my mother left and never came back, you raised me as if I were your own daughter. If you move here, what happens to our relationship?" Martha felt her heart tighten. She had raised Caitlin since she was 5 years old, when her daughter Monica decided she didn't want to be a mother and left to find herself, which in practice meant traveling across the country with a musician boyfriend and never giving any news again. "Caitlin, you will always be the most important thing in my life. If I move here, it will be with the hope that you'll come with me, or at least that you'll come spend time with me regularly." "But what about my school, my friends? You're finishing high school this year. When you start college, you were going to move away anyway, weren't you?" "True," admitted Caitlin, "and I was actually kind of lost about what I want to study." "Maybe here you'll find inspiration. You could study fashion, design, management to help run social projects. The possibilities are endless." Caitlin got up and walked over to one of the mannequins with a wedding dress. "Grandma, can I ask you a kind of silly question?" "Of course." "Do you think I have a knack for sewing?" Martha smiled. "I don't know, dear. Want to try?" They spent the next hour examining the sewing machines and materials left by Eleanor. Caitlin showed genuine curiosity about the tools and techniques, asking questions about stitches, types of fabric, and pattern making. "It's more complicated than it looks," she said, trying to make a straight stitch on a piece of fabric. "Everything is complicated at first, but with practice—" "Grandma, look at this," Caitlin said suddenly, pointing to a folder that had fallen behind one of the machines. "There are more documents here." Martha bent down and picked up the folder. It was marked "Future Projects" for Martha. "She really planned all this for me," murmured Martha, opening the folder. Inside were architectural plans showing how the warehouse could be renovated and expanded. There were also partnership proposals with national women's protection organizations, vocational training course projects, and even sketches for a website to make it easier to contact women who needed help. "Grandma, look at this drawing," said Caitlin, pointing to one of the blueprints. She designed a dormitory with several beds, a communal kitchen, a classroom. She wanted to turn this into a full support center, said Martha, impressed by her mother's vision. And look at this paper, Caitlin continued. It's a list of people she believed could help fund the project. Martha examined the list and was surprised to see several familiar names, business people from other cities, state-level politicians, famous artists, and international organizations. How did she know all these people? Perhaps through the women she helped over the years. Some must have become successful and kept in touch. Suddenly, Martha's cell phone rang. It was Mr. Patterson again. Mrs. Sullivan, I need to inform you of something urgent. The mayor has filed a motion to declare the property at risk. There's an order for a technical inspection tomorrow morning. What kind of inspection? Structural. If they find problems, they can order immediate demolition for public safety reasons. But doctor, the warehouse is in good condition. The beams are firm. There's no risk of collapse. Mrs. Sullivan, I need to be frank with you. This inspection might not be very much impartial. The chosen engineer has ties to the City Hall. After hanging up, Martha shared the information with Caitlin. Grandma, they're trying to force the demolition so you can't keep investigating. Exactly. We need to speed up our plans. What plans? We're going to document everything, photograph every detail, scan all the important documents, and if necessary, remove the most sensitive material from here. They spent the next few hours systematically photographing the entire contents of the warehouse. Caitlin used her cell phone while Martha organized the documents by order of importance. Grandma, I think we should look for a different lawyer, suggested Caitlin. Someone with no ties to the city. Good idea. Tomorrow morning before the inspection, we'll try to contact a law firm in Pittsburgh. When it was getting dark, they decided to return to the hotel, but as they left the warehouse, they noticed Walter's car parked on the street, with him inside watching the property. He's watching us, whispered Caitlin. Pretend you didn't see him and let's leave normally. On the way back to the hotel, Martha noticed that Walter's car followed them for a few blocks before disappearing down a side street. Grandma, I'm scared, Caitlin admitted. Me too, dear. But we can't give up now. That night, Martha had trouble sleeping. She kept thinking about everything she had discovered, that Eleanor was her biological mother, that she had dedicated her life to protecting vulnerable women, and that there was a group of people willing to do anything to cover up these activities. At 5 in the morning, she was woken up by the room telephone ringing. Mrs. Sullivan, it was Dorothy's voice whispering. I need to see you urgently. Something happened. What is it? I can't talk on the phone. Meet me at St. Joseph's Bakery in half an hour. It's on Main Street near the church. Martha woke Caitlin and they hurried to meet Dorothy. The woman was sitting at a table in the back of the bakery, looking nervous and tired. Mrs. Sullivan, last night someone tried to burn my house down, she said without preamble. What do you mean? Someone threw a flammable liquid on the back porch and set it on fire. Luckily I was awake and managed to put it out before it spread, but the message was clear. Did you file a police report? What for? The sheriff is the mayor's cousin. He'd say it was an accident or teenage vandalism. Caitlin was pale as she listened to the conversation. Mrs. Reynolds, they're trying to intimidate you because of us. Yes, they are, but that only confirms there's much more at stake than we imagined. What do you mean? Dorothy looked around to make sure no one was listening. Mrs. Sullivan, I spoke with some of the women Mrs. Eleanor helped. I found out 3 of them received threatening visits in recent days. They were all advised to forget the past and not speak with you. My God, murmured Martha. How many people are involved in this conspiracy? More than we imagine. It seems the Women's Protection Network Mrs. Eleanor created bothered many interests in town and the region. Mrs. Reynolds, said Caitlin, if it's that dangerous, maybe it really is better for us to leave. No, said Martha, with a firmness that surprised even herself. If they're doing this, it's because they're afraid of what we might discover. That means Aunt Eleanor's work was even more important than we imagined. But Grandma, what if something happens to us? Nothing will happen, dear. We'll be careful, but we won't back down. Dorothy smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. You're just like Mrs. Eleanor, She also became more determined when she faced resistance. "Mrs. Reynolds, I need to ask you something. Do you think you could gather some of the women Aunt Eleanor helped, discreetly?" "I can try, but it'll have to be very secretive." "What if we organize the meeting somewhere else, outside of town?" "Good idea. I know a farm in the outskirts that belongs to one of the women Mrs. Eleanor helped. She'd certainly lend us the space." They agreed Dorothy would organize the meeting for late afternoon, while Martha and Caitlin would handle the technical inspection at the warehouse. Back at the warehouse, they found a small city truck parked in front of the gate and 3 men waiting: Mayor Charles Montgomery, an engineer with a clipboard and measuring tools, and Walter. "Mrs. Sullivan," said the mayor with a fake smile, "I hope you understand this inspection is necessary for everyone's safety." "Of course," she replied, trying to remain calm. "You may enter." The engineer was a young man who seemed uncomfortable with the situation. He walked through the warehouse taking measurements and notes, but Martha noticed he avoided eye contact and seemed to be following a predefined script. "Several irregularities," he murmured to the mayor. "Compromised structure, outdated electrical installations, risk of collapse." "Engineer," Martha interrupted, "could you show me exactly where these structural problems are?" The man turned red and stammered, "Well, they're complex technical issues that a layperson can't identify. But I'd like to understand. After all, I'm the owner." The mayor quickly intervened. "Mrs. Sullivan, let's speed this up. What matters is the technical report proves the property isn't safe. The city can handle the demolition free of charge and even pay a symbolic compensation for the land." "How much?" $20,000. Martha almost laughed at the ridiculous offer. Just the vintage dresses and sewing machines were worth more than that. "I don't accept," she said. "Mrs. Sullivan," said Walter, stepping closer, "you're being stubborn. Accept the offer and go back to your quiet life in Pittsburgh." "Mr. Simmons, my life in Pittsburgh is none of your business," the mayor signaled to the engineer, who quickly concluded his inspection. "Well, the report will be delivered later today. You'll have 48 hours to remove your belongings before the demolition." After they left, Martha and Caitlin remained silent for a few minutes. "Grandma, are they really going to tear it down?" "They'll try, but you can't demolish a historic property without a proper legal process, and I'm going to fight it." "How?" "First, we'll hire an independent lawyer. Second, we'll document that this warehouse has historical and cultural value. And third, we're going to expose what's really happening here." "Expose how?" "I'm still thinking about that." In the afternoon, they headed to the farm where Dorothy had organized the meeting. It was a small property with a simple house and a yard where community gatherings were held. When they arrived, there were 7 women waiting, all between the ages of 40 and 70. Dorothy made the introductions. "This is Mrs. Rose, whom Mrs. Eleanor helped in 1995. This is Mrs. Mary Jo from 1998. Mrs. Christina from 2001. Each of the women had a story to tell. Rose had fled an arranged marriage set up by her parents to marry the man she loved. Mary Jo had escaped an abusive relationship, taking only her young children. Christina had been thrown out of her home by her parents when she became pregnant at 16. "Mrs. Eleanor didn't just hide me here for 2 months," Rose shared. "She taught me to sew so I could support myself. When I got married, it was in a dress I made myself, under her guidance. For me," said Mary Jo, "she found work as a seamstress in Philadelphia and even arranged a good school for my children. Today, they've graduated from college." "And she kept in touch with all of us," added Christina. "Every year I'd get a letter asking how I was, if I needed anything." Martha listened to each story with growing emotion. Her biological mother had truly changed dozens of lives over the years. "Ladies," she said finally, "I'm thinking of continuing Aunt Eleanor's work, but I need your help." "What kind of help?" asked Rose. "First, I want you to help me officially document the historical and social value of the warehouse. Each of you is a living witness to the importance of that place." "And second?" asked Mary Jo. "Second, I want to understand if there's still a need for this kind of work today. If there are women in the area who need the kind of support Aunt Eleanor offered." The women exchanged meaningful glances. "Mrs. Martha," said Christina, "unfortunately, The need is greater today than it was in Mrs. Eleanor's time. Only now, there's nowhere for these women to go. What do you mean? Domestic violence hasn't decreased. If anything, it's gotten worse. And the official resources are inadequate. The nearest support house is 200 kilometers from here. And are there specific cases you know of? Many, said Rose sadly. My own neighbor is going through a terrible situation, but she doesn't have the courage to leave because she doesn't know where to go with her 3 young children. And there's an 18-year-old girl who works at the fabric store in town, added Mary Jo. Her boyfriend is violent, but she has no family to support her. Martha felt she was making the right decision. Then it's settled. I'm staying in Millfield, and I'm reopening the support center. But Grandma, said Caitlin, how are you going to do that if they tear down the warehouse? They won't tear it down, said Martha, with a determination that surprised even herself. Because by tomorrow morning I'll have proof that that place is a historic landmark of the city. How? With your help, I'll document every story, every life that was transformed in that place, and I'll file a lawsuit to stop the demolition. Dorothy smiled. Mrs. Martha, I have a confession to make. Mrs. Eleanor always said that when you discovered the truth, you'd be even braver than she was. It's proving she was right. Mrs. Dorothy, could you help me with something? Of course. I need to get in touch with the local newspapers. This story needs to be told. I know a journalist in Pittsburgh who covers social issues. Her name is Paula Harrison, and she works for the local paper. Perfect, let's call her tonight. The women organized so each could write a detailed account of how Eleanor had changed their lives. They also committed to identifying other women who had been helped by her work over the years. How many women do you think Mrs. Eleanor helped all these years? Asked Caitlin. Hundreds, Rose answered without hesitation. She worked for over 40 years, and sometimes she helped several women at once. Imagine the social impact of that, said Martha. Hundreds of women who managed to restart their lives, raise their children safely, build careers. And those women's children benefited too, added Mary Jo. Both my sons became doctors. They always say it was thanks to the opportunity Mrs. Eleanor gave me to start over. When they returned to town, it was already night. Martha called journalist Paula Harrison, who showed great interest in the story. Mrs. Martha, this story is incredible. Can I come there tomorrow morning to do a full feature? Yes, you can. But I should warn you that there are people trying to stop this story from being told. Even better, I like challenges. The next morning, Paula arrived early in Millfield with a photographer. She was a woman about 35 years old, with a professional yet approachable appearance. Mrs. Martha, tell me everything from the beginning, she said, turning on her recorder. Martha narrated the whole story. The unexpected inheritance, the discovery of the intercepted letters, the documents proving Eleanor's work, the pressure to sell the warehouse, the threats, and the decision to continue her mother's work. And do you have proof of all this? Asked Paula. We do. Documents, photographs, testimonies from dozens of women who were helped. And do the local authorities know you're speaking with me? Not yet, but they'll know soon. Paula spent the entire morning documenting the story. She photographed the warehouse, the historical dresses, the documents without revealing sensitive details, and interviewed several of the women Eleanor had helped. Mrs. Martha, she said before leaving, this feature will run in Sunday's paper, and I'll suggest the local TV station do a story too. Do you think it will help stop the demolition? I think it will generate enough public pressure to at least delay any drastic measures. That afternoon, Martha received an unexpected call. It was from a law firm in Philadelphia. Mrs. Martha, my name is Mr. Richard Taylor. I'm a lawyer specializing in historical preservation and human rights. I read about your case through a colleague and would like to offer my services free of charge. How did you hear about the case? Attorney Paula Harrison told me. She's my sister. Oh, I see. And can you really help? I can and will. I'm already preparing a lawsuit to halt any demolition order. I'll also file a petition to declare the warehouse a cultural historical landmark. Is that possible? Absolutely. With the testimonies you've collected and the historical documentation, we have a very strong case. Martha felt tremendous relief. Finally, there was someone with legal knowledge on their side. "Mr. Richard, there's something you need to know. I found evidence that the current mayor committed several crimes in the past related to exploiting vulnerable women." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents proving extortion, facilitation of assaults, forgery of official documents." "Mrs. Martha, this is very serious. Are these pieces of evidence in a safe place?" "They are, and there are copies in several locations." "Excellent. We'll use this information strategically. First, we stop the demolition, then we report the crimes." That night, Martha slept more peacefully for the first time since she arrived in Millfield. She had a feeling that things were starting to fall into place, but the next morning she was awakened by an urgent call from Dorothy. "Mrs. Martha, you need to come here right away. Something terrible has happened." "What is it?" "They tried to set the warehouse on fire overnight." Martha and Caitlin dressed quickly and rushed to the scene. The warehouse was intact, but there were clear signs of an attempted fire on the outside. Pieces of burnt wood and the smell of fuel still hung in the air. "Luckily, I was passing by here at 4 in the morning on my way back from my daughter's house," explained Dorothy. "I saw the flames and managed to put them out with the neighbor's hose before they spread." "They're desperate," said Martha, examining the damage. "They know they've lost control of the situation." "Grandma, I think we should call the police," suggested Caitlin. "It won't do any good. But let's photograph everything for evidence." They spent the morning documenting the traces of the attempted arson. They also organized the most important documents better, creating digital copies and emailing them to Mr. Richard. In the afternoon, Paula called to say that the article would be published in the next day's newspaper, and that the local TV station had confirmed a report for the following week. "Mrs. Martha, the story is gaining traction. I've already received calls from other cities asking about Mrs. Eleanor's work." "What do you mean?" "It seems she was more well known than we thought. There are records of her collaborating with organizations in other states too." "That's amazing." "And there's more. I got a call from a state representative who works with women's rights. She wants to come see the project in person." "A representative?" "Yes, Representative Florence Adams. She said she had already heard about Mrs. Eleanor's work through other organizations." Martha was impressed by the scale the story was taking on. Aunt Eleanor had built something much bigger than she had imagined. That evening, she and Caitlin were organizing the last documents when they heard footsteps outside the warehouse. Martha approached the window and saw that it was Charles Montgomery, the mayor, accompanied by 2 men she didn't know. "Mrs. Martha," he shouted from the gate, "I need to speak with you." "About what?" "About a proposal that might interest you." Against Caitlin's advice, Martha decided to go to the gate to hear what he had to say. "Listen carefully," said the mayor in a threatening tone. "You're messing with forces you don't understand. There are much bigger interests at play here." "What kind of interests?" "This land is strategic for the city's development. We have investors interested in building a shopping center here." "And for that you want to demolish a historical heritage?" "Historical heritage?" he laughed. "You're delusional. This is just an old warehouse." "Mr. Mayor, starting tomorrow, the whole country will know the historical importance of this place." The smile vanished from his face. "What do you mean?" "The press. The article comes out tomorrow in the newspaper and on TV." The mayor became visibly nervous. "You don't know what you're getting into. There are people who won't like this exposure at all." "What people?" "People who prefer that certain things from the past remain buried." One of the men accompanying the mayor stepped forward. He was a burly man with an intimidating appearance. "Mrs. Martha," he said in a deep voice, "it would be a shame if something happened to you or your little granddaughter here in Millfield." Caitlin, who was watching from the window, felt a chill down her spine upon hearing the veiled threat. "Are you threatening me?" asked Martha, trying to stay calm. "We're offering protection," said the mayor. "Accept our purchase offer and return to Pittsburgh. It's safer for everyone." "I won't accept." "Then you're responsible for whatever happens from now on." After they left, Martha went back inside the warehouse with trembling hands. "Grandma, they really threatened us," said Caitlin. "I think we should call the police." "And say what? That the mayor offered us protection?" "But Grandma, What if they actually do something? They won't do anything. Now that the press is involved, anything that happens to us will be investigated. Are you sure? No, admitted Martha, but I can't give up now. I have to trust we're doing the right thing. The next morning, the story was published on the front page of the Pittsburgh newspaper with the headline, "Abandoned Warehouse Hid Women's Support Network for Decades." The article detailed Eleanor's story and included emotional testimonies from several women she had helped. Martha's phone didn't stop ringing all day. There were calls from journalists from other states, human rights organizations, other women who had been helped by Eleanor and didn't know what was happening, and even people offering financial support to restore the warehouse. "Grandma, look at this," said Caitlin, showing her phone. "The article has been shared thousands of times on social media." "And look at this email," said Martha. "It's from an international women's protection organization. They want to learn about the project and possibly help fund the restoration." In the afternoon, Mr. Richard called with good news. "Mrs. Martha, I obtained an injunction suspending any demolition orders. The warehouse is legally protected, while the process to designate it as a historical landmark is underway." "Does that mean they can't threaten us anymore?" "Theoretically, yes. Any attempt to damage the property now is a crime against public heritage. And the evidence against the mayor? I'm reviewing all the material. There's enough for at least 3 different criminal complaints." That evening, Martha and Caitlin had dinner in peace for the first time since arriving in town. The pressure had visibly eased, and they began making concrete plans for the future. "Grandma, have you really decided to move here?" "Yes, I have. And you?" "I think I want to try, at least for a while." "Even knowing it'll be hard work to rebuild everything?" "Especially because of that. I've never done anything truly important in my life. Here I can help real people." "What about college?" "I can study remotely or take entrance exams here in the region. And there's that idea for vocational courses in the warehouse. I can help organize that." Martha smiled, feeling she had made the right decision. "Then let's do this together." "Let's." They spent the next week organizing the practical details of the move. Martha put her Pittsburgh house up for sale and began planning the necessary renovations for the warehouse. Caitlin researched colleges in the region and started drafting proposals for the vocational courses. State Representative Florence Adams visited the warehouse and was impressed by the story and the project's potential. "Mrs. Martha, I can secure state funds to help with the restoration, and I know federal organizations that work with similar projects. Representative Florence, what would be the ideal capacity for the center? Given the size of the property and regional demand, you could accommodate up to 50 women simultaneously. Temporary housing, vocational courses, psychological support, legal assistance. It's a big project." "It is. But the need is great too. And you already have the hardest part: the story, the credibility, and the community's support." 3 months later, the warehouse was undergoing full renovation. Martha had permanently moved to Millfield and rented a small house near the city center. Caitlin had transferred to a local school to finish high school and was loving her new life. Mayor Charles Montgomery had resigned from his position after the allegations based on Eleanor's documents were formalized by the district attorney's office. Walter had discreetly left town, selling his property at a low price. "Grandma, the first group of women has arrived," said Caitlin, seeing a car stop in front of the renovated warehouse. There were 5 women, aged between 20 and 50, all referred by protection organizations in the region. Martha welcomed them in the entrance hall, where she had placed a large photo of Eleanor with the phrase, "Every woman deserves a second chance." "Welcome to the Eleanor Center for Women's Support," she said, moved. The first woman, a young woman of about 25 with a small child in her arms, approached. "Mrs. Sullivan, my name is Amanda. I came from Allentown because I heard that here you really help women start over." "Yes, we do, dear. And you'll see you're not alone." Caitlin approached and held out her arms to the child. "Can I hold him? I love babies." "Yes, you can," said Amanda, smiling for the first time in a long while. Seeing her granddaughter interacting naturally with the child and the women getting to know each other and forming immediate bonds, Martha felt a deep peace in her heart. She had found not only her origin and family history, but also her purpose. 6 months later, the Eleanor Center had already served more than 80 women. Some stayed only a few days until they resolved specific issues. Others remained for months, participating in vocational training courses and completely restructuring their lives. Caitlin had discovered a calling for social work and decided to study social work at the regional federal university. She divided her time between studies and volunteer work at the center, specializing in assisting mothers with young children. Grandma, remember that first woman who arrived here? Amanda? Of course, how is she? She finished the sewing course, got a job at a clothing factory in Pittsburgh, and managed to get her own apartment. Yesterday, she brought her son here to show us how much he's grown. And the others from the first group. Monica started a small homemade sweets business. Regina went back to school and is finishing high school. Patricia got a job as a receptionist at a clinic. They're all doing well. And we have new ones arriving every week. It's amazing how the word spreads. Yesterday, a woman from Tennessee called asking if we accept people from other states. And do we? Of course we do. Aunt Eleanor never made distinctions about where the women came from. 1 year after discovering the warehouse, Martha was sitting on the porch of the small house she had bought in Millfield, reading thank you letters from the women who had passed through the center. It was Sunday morning, and the town church bell rang softly in the distance. Caitlin appeared on the porch carrying a tray with coffee and homemade cheese bread. "Grandma, I have a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "Look who's here." Martha looked toward the gate and saw a woman of about 40 approaching. She had brown hair, green eyes, and a familiar smile. "Monica," whispered Martha, recognizing the daughter who had left 17 years before. "Hi, Mom," said Monica, with tears in her eyes. "I came to ask for forgiveness and to learn about the amazing work you're doing here." Martha stood up slowly, still not believing what she was seeing. "How did you find out?" "I read the article in the newspaper. A friend from New York City sent it to me. When I saw your photo and read your story, I realized I'd been wrong about many things in my life." Caitlin approached her mother with some hesitation. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, my daughter," said Monica, hugging her daughter. "I'm so sorry I missed so much of your life, but now I want to be part of it again, if you'll have me." "Monica," said Martha Sullivan, still processing the situation. "Where have you been all these years?" "Making mistakes, Mom. Thinking that being independent meant running away from responsibilities. But when I read about what you and Caitlin are doing here, I realized I want to be part of something bigger too." "And what do you plan to do?" "If you'll have me, I want to work at the center. I have experience in administration and can help organize the bureaucratic and financial side." Martha Sullivan looked at Caitlin, who nodded with a smile. "Of course we accept. There's always room for another woman who wants to help other women." 3 months later, Monica had moved to Millfield and was coordinating the expansion of the Eleanor Center. With her administrative experience, she managed to better organize resources and significantly expand the service capacity. "Mom, we have an interesting proposal," she said, entering the office that had been created in Eleanor's old sewing space. "What proposal?" "The State University wants to partner with us. They would offer internships for psychology, social work, and law students, and we would receive free technical support." "That's a great idea. What do you think, Caitlin?" "I think it's perfect. This way we can expand the services we offer without increasing costs too much." "And there's more," continued Monica. "I got a call from an international organization. They want to use our model as a pilot to replicate in other small towns across the United States." "How so?" "They believe the community support center model works better in smaller towns where there's more sense of community. They want to document our methodology and help create similar centers in other regions." Martha Sullivan stood up and walked to the window, where she could see the central courtyard of the renovated warehouse. Several women were sitting in a circle, participating in a group therapy session led by a volunteer psychologist. Others were in the sewing room, learning tailoring techniques. In the back, a group of children played, supervised by Caitlin and other volunteers. "You know what amazes me the most?" she said, turning to her daughters. "What, Grandma?" "That all this started with a warehouse I didn't even know existed, and an aunt I barely knew. And today we're a family again, working together to help other families. It's as if everything was connected from the beginning, said Monica, as if Aunt Eleanor knew that one day you would come here and continue her work. And multiply it far beyond what she dreamed, added Caitlin. Martha Sullivan smiled, feeling Eleanor's presence in that space that now pulsed with life and hope. She always knew. Mothers always know. 2 years after discovering the warehouse, the Eleanor Center had become a national reference in community support for women. Martha Sullivan had been invited to speak at several universities, telling the story of how an inherited warehouse had changed not only her life but the lives of hundreds of other women. On the center's 2-year anniversary, they organized a special celebration. All the women who had passed through the center were invited, along with supporters, volunteers, and officials. "Grandma, look how many people came," said Caitlin, watching the crowded courtyard. "It's moving to see how each of these women has a story of overcoming to tell." Amanda, the first woman served by the center, approached with her son, now 3 years old. "Mrs. Martha, I want you to know my life has completely changed since I arrived here. Today I have my own clothing store and I'm engaged to a wonderful man I met in an entrepreneurship course. I'm so happy for you, dear. And I want to make a proposal. I'm doing well financially now and would like to help support the center every month." "Amanda, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. I want other women to have the same opportunity I had. Several other women have approached us with similar offers. Some offered financial help, others volunteer work, and still others referrals for new women needing support." "Grandma," whispered Caitlin, "I think we created something bigger than we imagined." "We didn't create it, dear, we continued it. Aunt Eleanor had already planted the seed, we just helped it grow." During the party, Dorothy approached carrying a wrapped package. "Mrs. Martha, I have a special gift for you." "What is it, Mrs. Dorothy?" "Open it and see." Martha unwrapped the package and found a frame containing an old photo of Eleanor, surrounded by dozens of smaller photos of the women she had helped over the years. "How did you get all these photos?" "I collected them over the months. Every woman I met, I asked for a photo to add to the frame. I wanted to pay tribute to Mrs. Eleanor by showing the true impact of her work." Martha held the frame with tears in her eyes. In the center, Eleanor smiled serenely, surrounded by dozens of faces representing transformed lives. "It's the most beautiful gift I could receive." "Mrs. Martha," said Dorothy softly, "I think Mrs. Eleanor would be very proud of you." "I hope so." As the party continued, Martha had time to reflect on everything that had happened since that day she received the lawyer's call about the inheritance. Her life had completely changed, but in a way she could never have imagined. "Mom," said Monica, approaching, "there's a journalist here wanting to do a story about the center for a national magazine. What does he want to know?" "The whole story, from discovering the warehouse until now. He said it's a story that needs to be known across the country. And do you think we should do the interview?" "I think so. The more exposure we get, the more women will know there's a place where they can seek help." Martha agreed and spent an hour talking with the journalist, telling every detail of the story. When she finished, he made an observation that deeply moved her. "Mrs. Martha, in my opinion, you didn't just inherit a warehouse, you inherited a purpose." "What do you mean?" "You were at a stage in life where you felt lost, not knowing what your role in the world was, and suddenly you discovered your mission had been waiting for you for decades. I never thought of it that way. It's a story of connection between generations. Your aunt planted, you cultivated, and your granddaughter and daughter will continue harvesting the fruits." That night, after all the guests had left, Martha, Monica, and Caitlin were alone in the center, cleaning up the last traces of the party. "Grandma," said Caitlin, putting away the chairs, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything? Leaving your life in Pittsburgh, getting involved in all this?" Martha stopped sweeping and looked around the space that had become the center of her new life. "You know, dear, I spent 58 years thinking I knew who I was and what my place in the world was, but I discovered I was wrong. My true purpose was here, waiting to be discovered." "And do you think Aunt Eleanor planned all this?" "I think she hoped. Mothers always hope their children find their way, even when it takes them a long time." "And now, what are the plans for the future?" Monica joined the conversation. "Mom, I received an interesting proposal today. An international organization wants to help us create a network of similar centers throughout Latin America. How would that work? They would offer training, initial funding, and technical support to replicate our model in other cities and countries. That's a big responsibility. It is, but it's also an opportunity to multiply Aunt Eleanor's work on a scale she could never have imagined. Martha Sullivan considered the proposal. 2 years earlier, she was a retired widow with no clear prospects for the future. Now she was being invited to lead an international women's support project. "I'll accept," she said, surprising even herself with the quick decision. "Are you sure, Grandma?" "I am, because I've learned that when we have the chance to do something truly important, we can't waste it out of fear or insecurity." "And what would our participation look like?" "You two would be my partners. Caitlin would handle the educational and training aspects, Monica the administrative and financial parts, and I'd take care of overall coordination and institutional relations." "A family-run social impact enterprise," said Monica, smiling. "Exactly." 3 months later, they were in Washington, D.C., attending an international conference on women's rights. Martha had been invited as the keynote speaker to share the story of the Eleanor Center and present the expansion proposal to other countries. "Mum, are you nervous?" asked Monica, seeing Martha review her notes for the 10th time. "A little. I never imagined that one day I'd be speaking to an audience of 500 people about public policy and human rights." "Grandma, you'll do great," said Caitlin. "No one knows this story better than you." When it was her turn to speak, Martha took the stage and looked at the audience composed of representatives from international organizations, politicians, academics, and activists from various countries. "3 years ago," she began, "I was a retired widow who thought her useful life had ended. Today I'm here to share how an inherited warehouse taught me it's never too late to discover our true purpose." She told the whole story, from the lawyer's phone call to the transformation of the warehouse into a reference center. She spoke about Eleanor, about the women who were helped, about the resistance they encountered, and about the importance of creating community support networks. "What we learned," she concluded, "is that effective solutions to complex social problems don't just come from government policies or large organizations. They also come from ordinary people who decide to make a difference in their communities." The audience responded with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. After the presentation, Martha was approached by dozens of people interested in learning more about the project and how they could replicate it in their countries. "Mrs. Sullivan," said a woman who introduced herself as director of a Chilean organization, "I'd like to invite you to visit our country and help us implement a similar project." "And we from Uruguay are also interested," added another representative. "And Mexico," said a third person. By the end of the day, they had received invitations from 12 different countries and funding proposals from 3 international organizations. "Grandma," said Caitlin that night at the hotel, "I think we've created a monster." "What do you mean?" "In a good way. The project has grown so much that we now have international responsibilities." "And are you prepared for that?" "We are," said Monica, "but it will require a lot of work and dedication." "And travel. Lots of travel." "I don't mind," said Martha. "Aunt Eleanor spent her whole life working in a warehouse in Millfield. If I can now bring her work to the whole world, that's what I'm going to do." A year later, the Eleanor Network was already operating in 7 countries across Latin America. Each center maintained local characteristics but followed the basic principles developed in the original warehouse: community support, professional training, temporary shelter, and protection networks. Martha divided her time between supervisory trips, training new coordinators, and working at the original center in Millfield. Monica had moved to New York City to coordinate the network's administrative side, and Caitlin was finishing her social work degree and preparing to take on the technical coordination of all centers. "Grandma, an interesting letter arrived today," said Caitlin, entering the office where Martha was reviewing reports from all the network centers. "From where?" "From Sweden. It's from a European organization that wants to learn about our work." "Sweden? How did they hear about us?" Apparently, our story has been translated into several languages and is circulating among human rights organizations worldwide. Martha took the letter and read it. It was an invitation to participate in a global conference on innovation in social policies, where she would be honored as Woman of the Year for her contribution to combating domestic violence. Caitlin, this is surreal. How can I be Woman of the Year when I only started this work 4 years ago? Grandma, you don't understand the impact of what we've created. The Eleanor Network has already helped over 2,000 women, and each one of them has impacted their families, their communities. And there's more, said Monica, joining the conversation. I just received data from the statistics office. The cities where we have Eleanor Network centers have seen a 40% reduction in reported domestic violence cases and a 60% increase in the rate of women who manage to leave abusive relationships. How did they measure that? By comparing them with similar cities that don't have our centers. The numbers are impressive. Martha leaned back in her chair, still trying to process the scale of what they had built. You know what amazes me the most, she said? That all this started because someone tried to stop Aunt Eleanor from contacting me. If she had been able to call me back then, maybe none of this would have happened. Or maybe it would have happened differently, said Caitlin. Maybe you weren't ready at that time to understand the importance of her work. That's true. I needed to go through grief, retirement, that period of not knowing what my role in the world was. To be ready to receive the inheritance, added Monica, not just the warehouse, the complete inheritance, the purpose, the mission, the responsibility. 5 years after discovering the warehouse, Martha was back in Millfield for the inauguration of the new Eleanor Network campus. The original center had been expanded and now included a vocational school, a medical clinic, a daycare for the children of the women served, and dormitories to accommodate up to 100 people at a time. Grandma, remember when we first arrived here and you were afraid to enter the warehouse? Said Caitlin, watching the movement of people in the complex. I remember. And you said it looked like a place from a horror movie. And now look at this. It looks like a small university. The complex was truly impressive. Besides the new buildings, the original warehouse had been completely restored and transformed into the historical center of the project, housing a museum that told the story of Eleanor and the women she had helped. Mrs. Martha, said Dorothy, approaching, I have a surprise for you. What is it now, Mrs. Dorothy? Come with me. She led her to a part of the complex that Martha hadn't seen yet. It was a small but well-kept garden with a wooden bench in the center and a bronze plaque. Read the plaque, said Dorothy. Martha approached and read, Memory Garden, in honor of Eleanor Sullivan and all the women who found a second chance here. Donated by the women served by the Eleanor Network between 2019 and 2024. They organized themselves to create this space, explained Dorothy. Each one contributed a little, some with money, others with work, others with plants. Martha sat on the bench and looked around the garden. There were small plaques with words of gratitude from various women, photos of families that had been reunited, drawings made by children. It's beautiful, she said with tears in her eyes. And look at this, said Caitlin, pointing to a tree in the corner of the garden. It's a sapling from the tree that grew in Aunt Eleanor's backyard. The roots are the same. How did you manage that? Her house was demolished last year, but we managed to save some saplings. This tree literally carries the roots of our family's history. Martha approached the tree and touched the young trunk. It was a strange feeling to think that this plant had started growing when Eleanor was still alive, and now it continued growing in the place that celebrated her legacy. Grandma, said Caitlin softly, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you still miss your previous life? The house in Pittsburgh, the simpler routine? Martha thought for a moment before answering. Sometimes I miss the tranquility. This life is much more intense, much fuller of responsibilities. But I don't regret it for a second. Why? Because I discovered I had much more to give than I imagined, and I found that making a difference in other people's lives is what truly gives meaning to my existence. And how long do you think you'll keep doing this? Until I can't anymore. This work has given me an energy I didn't even know I had. At 63, I feel more alive than I have in the last 20 years. Monica joined them in the garden, carrying a folder with documents. Mom, the annual reports from all the network centers have arrived. How are we doing? Excellent. There are already 17 centers operating in 9 countries. In total, we served over 5,000 women last year. And financially, sustainable. Most centers can already support themselves with local donations and regional partnerships. The model is working. And the new projects? 3 countries in Africa have expressed interest in implementing the model, and there's a proposal for expansion into Asia as well. Martha shook her head, still impressed by the scale the project had taken. Girls, you know I won't be here forever to coordinate all this, right? Mom, you can't talk like that, said Monica. I'm not talking about dying, I'm talking about actually retiring one day. And I want to make sure you're fully prepared to take over the leadership. We are, said Caitlin. We already are, actually. You're more of an inspiring and symbolic figure now. The operational work is already all ours. And that's good. It means the project doesn't depend on just one person to keep existing. Like in Aunt Eleanor's time, observed Monica. When she passed, the work died with her because there was no institutional structure. Exactly. We created something bigger and more lasting. That evening, during the inauguration ceremony of the new campus, Martha was invited to give the main speech. She climbed onto the small stage set up in the central courtyard and looked at the audience of over 300 people. Women served by the network, family members, volunteers, officials, representatives of international organizations. When I was a child, she began, my Aunt Margaret always told me that life had mysterious ways of guiding us to where we needed to be. At the time, I thought it was just a saying. Today I know it was a profound truth. She told the story of discovering the warehouse once more, but this time emphasized the lessons she had learned in the process. I learned that it's never too late to discover our true purpose. I learned that the biggest changes start with small acts of courage. I learned that when we help one person, we create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. But most importantly, she continued, I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about shared purpose. It's about taking care of each other. It's about building something bigger than ourselves. She pointed to Caitlin and Monica in the audience. My granddaughter and my daughter are my partners in this work. But all the women who have passed through the Eleanor Network are also my family, and all the women you will help in the future will be too. That's why, she concluded, this place is not an end. It's a beginning. Every woman who leaves here strengthened and empowered will help other women, and so Aunt Eleanor's legacy continues to multiply, generation after generation. The ceremony ended with a surprise that Caitlin and Monica had organized in secret. They brought to the stage a representative from each of the 17 centers of the Eleanor Network, each carrying a rose and a thank you letter from their country. Grandma, said Caitlin, handing over a bouquet with the 17 roses. These flowers represent all the lives you've touched and all the places where Aunt Eleanor's work continues to live. Martha held the bouquet with trembling hands, too moved to speak. And these letters, added Monica, are from women in every country where we have centers. They all wanted to thank you personally, but since they couldn't come, they wrote their messages. Martha looked at the letters, then at the roses, then at the 2 daughters watching her with pride. Finally, she looked at the audience full of smiling and hopeful faces. Thank you, she said simply, for allowing me to be part of this story. End of story. And now we want to know, what did you think of Martha's journey? Do you believe it's never too late to discover our true purpose? Tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. If you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope and new beginnings, share this video. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.